Hey, man, people are already talking like the AFC South quarterback race is settled. Like, there's no debate. Like, one guy clearly controls this division. But when you actually break down the production, the offensive environments, and what these quarterbacks really did last season, that story starts falling apart fast. Everybody got CJ Stroud as QB1 in the South, but I don't. Let me tell you why. After the music go. Hey man, welcome back to Football is Money. I'm your host, TheyKallMeBoss. And if you tapped in right now, man, stay with me through this episode because I'm showing you exactly how to get your name on the wheel. And if your name is already on the wheel, I'm going to show you how to get it on there again. Yes, you can stack entries. That $100 giveaway, man, is still alive, and every episode gives you another chance to qualify. Today, we're breaking down the AFC South quarterback rankings from the ground up. Production, structure, and which situation actually controls this division heading into the season. By the time we get to the rankings at the end, the order might not look like what most people expect. You already know how we get down, man. Football is money. But before we even start ranking these QBs, we got to slow down and really look at what happened in the AFC South last year. Because the standings, they tell one story. But when you dig into the quarterback production and how these offenses actually operated, you start seeing a completely different picture. Because standings show results, but offensive production explains control. From a team standpoint, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they finished with 13-4 and won the division. The Houston Texans, they was right there at 12-5. The Colts, I think they was 8-9, and the Tennessee Titans came in at 3-14. So just looking at records, it's easy to say Jacksonville and H-Town was clearly on top. The Colts, they was trying to close the gap, and Tennessee was still playing catch up. But once you bring the quarterbacks into the conversation, once you look at how these offenses actually moved the ball, finished drives, and created points, that's where things start separating. So let's start in Tennessee with Cam Ward because his numbers require more context than anybody in this division. So Cam Ward finished his rookie season with 3,169 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions with an 80 passer rating. Now, if you just throw those numbers on the screen by themselves, the easy conclusion is that he struggled. But that's not the full story. Tennessee finished 30th in passing, 29th in receiving yards, 31st in first downs, and 30th in rushing yards, and 30th in points scored. And that's not one weak category, that's one entire offensive structure. So Ward wasn't operating with rhythm. He wasn't operating with balance. He wasn't operating with consistent scoring opportunities. He stepped into one of the lowest support offensive environments in this division. And he did it against one of the hardest defensive schedules any quarterback saw last season. And that turns his rookie numbers into a context story, not a ceiling story. Now shift over to Trevor Lawrence. He finished the season with 4,007 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and had a passer rating of 90.97. The number that jumps out immediately is the touchdown production. 29 touchdowns in this division matters. That's drive, finish, and production. And when you match that with Jacksonville offensive ranking, the picture gets even clearer. They finished 12th in passing yards, 11th in receiving yards, 14th in first downs, and 20th in rushing yards. So this wasn't a dominant offense across every category. They wasn't overwhelming teams on the ground. They wasn't controlling games purely through possessions either. But they still finished 6th in points, which, that was the highest scoring offense in the AFC South. And that tells you Jacksonville converted opportunities into touchdowns instead of field goals. And that's quarterback-driven scoring impact. Now look at Daniel Jones. He finished with a little over 3,100 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, but he had a passer rating over 100, which was the highest passer rating among starting quarterbacks in this division. 19 touchdowns doesn't jump off the screen at first glance, but when you connect that efficiency to what the Colts did offensively as a team, the story changes. The Colts, they finished 9th in passing yards, 8th in receiving, and 10th in first downs, 17th in rushing yards, and 8th in points scored. So that's balance. There's consistency across the entire offense. They moved the ball through the air. They converted drives. They finished possessions. And even when Jones cooled later in the season, the offensive structure stayed productive. And that tells you that the coach quietly built one of the more stable offensive foundations in this division. And then there's C.J. Stroud, because this is where the conversation really shifts, right? Stroud finished last season with 3,041 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. 92.91 passer rating. That's efficient football. That's controlled football. That's quarterback play, coaches trust, right? Houston still finished at 12-5 with their profile though. But once you zoom out and look at the offense around those numbers, you'll see that Houston finished 14th in passing yards, 14th in receiving yards, 27th in first downs, and 22nd in rushing yards, and 13th in points scored. So Houston won games. They played clean football. They avoided a lot of mistakes, but they was not the highest scoring offense in this division. And when another quarterback in this same division threw 10 more touchdowns while leading the top scoring offense in the AFC South, that becomes part of the quarterback conversation, whether people want it to or not. Because even with those production differences on the table, Vegas still opened the AFC South with Houston at plus 160, Jacksonville at plus 175, the Colts at plus 350, and the Titans at plus 800. So the market is still leaning towards H-Town and C.J. Stroud. Still leaning towards the idea that the quarterback situation there is the safest in the division. And once you actually look at the touchdowns, the efficiency, the offensive ranking, and how these teams were really winning games last season, that assumption deserves a closer look. Don't you believe? And that's where we start breaking these quarterbacks down one by one. Now, here's where things get important. Because when you look at those numbers from last season, they don't all mean the same thing moving forward. With Daniel Jones operating inside a top 10 offense across multiple categories, that might tell you just as much about the system around him as it does about the quarterback himself. With C.J. Stroud going 12-5 while throwing just 19 touchdown passes, that started looking more like a team structure versus a quarterback carrying offense in this division. With Cam Ward finishing 3-14, but still throwing for over 3,100 yards as a rookie inside of one of the lowest ranked offenses in the league, that looks like a development season inside a rebuilding environment. And with a new structure coming in, that situation probably can change pretty quickly, right? And then there's Trevor Lawrence, over 4,000 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, and led the highest scoring offense in the AFC South. There was clearly the strongest quarterback production profile in this division last year. But the real question isn't who played the best last season. The real question is what those situations means going forward. And that's where the rankings start separating. Now that we've looked at what happened last season, the next step is figuring out what those situations actually mean going forward. Because quarterback ranking inside of divisions is not built on past production alone, right? They're built on who is positioned to control offense right now. So let's talk about Cam Ward. You know, he entered the league in one of the toughest offensive environments anywhere in the division. Tennessee finished near the bottom across almost every major offensive category. And that kind of situation changed how rookie production should be evaluated. Even inside their structure, he still threw for over 3,000 yards. And that's not the profile of a quarterback being protected by his system. That's a quarterback learning while carrying responsibility earlier than most rookies are able to do or even asked to do. You know, Tennessee is clearly reshaping its offensive identity, and Ward is developing alongside of that reset instead of stepping into something already finished. So instead of judging him strictly by year one results, this becomes a trajectory conversation. If the surrounding structure improves, his role expands quickly. And that makes him one of the biggest movement variables anywhere in the AFC South going into this season. Now let's shift over to Danny Dimes. The coach quietly operated one of the most balanced offensive profiles in the division last season. Top 10 passing, top 10 receiving, top 10 first down production, and that kind of consistency across multiple categories rarely happens by accident. Jones opened the year playing efficient football. He cooled down later in the season, but, you know, the offense itself still continued functioning, you know, at a somewhat decent level throughout the year. That stability on the offense matters when you projecting these quarterbacks and players moving forward. Quarterbacks inside of balanced systems tend to carry higher weekly liabilities, you know, because the offense does not depend on one phase to stay productive. So with Daniel Jones, the evaluation becomes about influence. Does he remain a steady operator inside a strong structure, or does his role expand into something that shapes the offense more directly? That answer determines how high his ceiling sits inside this division. Now let's move to Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence is coming off the strongest scoring production profile among any AFC South quarterback from last season. 29 tutties, you know, while leading the highest scoring offense in the division, right? Jacksonville didn't dominate yardage categories across the board. They wasn't overwhelming teams with rushing production. They wasn't controlling games purely through possession either. But when they reached scoring position, they converted. That type of efficiency shows up when the quarterback is finishing drives instead of simply extending them, right? And when the offense already knows how to generate points with this quarterback at the center of the system, the ceiling tends to stay intact heading into the next season. So Jacksonville enters the year with a quarterback who's already demonstrated he can lead a scoring offense inside this division. And then there's Stroud. This is where the conversation starts to change direction. Stroud played efficient football, over 3,000 passing yards, only 8 picks, 12-5 with him running the offense. And that's winning quarterback play. I can't take that away. But efficiency and control are not always the same thing. Houston wasn't the highest scoring offense in the division. They wasn't leading the division in passing touchdowns. Their success came from disciplined execution across the roster rather than an offense built around the high volume scoring through the quarterback position. So the evaluation here becomes about responsibility share. If the offense continues winning through structure, Houston stays consistent. If the offense shifts towards quarterback-driven scoring production, Stroud's position inside this division changes rapido. And when you place all four of these situations next to each other, you got a developing system in Tennessee, a balanced structure in Indianapolis, a scoring offense already established in Jacksonville, and a efficiency-driven win profile in Houston. The quarterback picture inside the AFC South starts looking a lot less settled than people assume at first glance, which is exactly where the separation between perception and projection begins. Quick reminder, if you're still tapped in right now, man, make sure you stay with me through the rest of the episode so you can see exactly how to get your name on the wheel again, all right? And if your name is already on there, learn how to, I'm going to show you how to get it on there again. Let me clear something up about how we evaluate these quarterbacks over here at Football is Money. You know, we're not just ranking quarterbacks based on wins. We're not ranking quarterbacks based on playoff appearances. And we definitely not ranking quarterbacks based on Super Bowl wins. All right. We are ranking quarterbacks based on production. And that's it. Because production is what translates into fantasy football wins. And production is what translates into betting opportunities. There's a difference between a quarterback who plays well inside a system and a quarterback who drives the system. All right. System quarterbacks can help their team win games, right? But system quarterbacks usually doesn't translate into your fantasy team winning the game. They can help you survive a matchup, but they don't carry a matchup. And that distinction matters when you're trying to decide who you can actually trust week to week. Take a quarterback that throws 19 touchdowns across the season. The whole season, 19 touchdowns. Now, that can still be a winning quarterback in the NFL. But from a fantasy standpoint, that usually means you're not getting consistent multi-touchdown weeks, which means betting the over 1.5 passing touchdowns become harder to bet on every week, right? Now, compare that to a quarterback throwing close to 30 touchdowns in a season. That type of production creates repeatable scoring opportunities. That creates fantasy value. That creates betting value. That creates predictability. And predictability is where money gets made. That's what I'm trying to tell you. So when you evaluating quarterbacks inside this division or any division, we are not ignoring wins. We are identifying where the production actually lives, okay? Because if a quarterback's averaging 200 to 300 or more yards a game and throwing 2 to 3 touchdowns most weeks, that's something you can project forward. That's something you can bet on. And I mean, even if a quarterback isn't throwing that, you still can bet the under. So it's ways to always bet on if a quarterback is projected to do good or do bad. But when it comes to fantasy, you want to pay a little bit more attention. And right now, inside the AFC South, the quarterback whose production profile most clearly supports that type of projection is Trevor Lawrence, which is exactly why he sits at number 1 in these rankings. Because here, man, everything is football is money. So before we wrap up this episode, let me explain how the wheel works once again. Because every episode is another opportunity for you to get your name entered into the $100 giveaway. So if you see your name on the wheel in red, that means you missed a step. You missed a step somewhere. You either subscribed but didn't sign up on the website, signed up on the website or didn't subscribe, or you completed both of those but you didn't give me a good football take. All right. So once all 3 steps are complete, your name turns green. Green means verified. Green means locked in. Greens mean you are officially in the giveaway. Now the gold entries, they are bonus entries. Those come from strong football takes. You know, you don't get bonus entries from dropping one take and hoping it hits. Give me multiple takes, engage across multiple episodes, and that gives you more opportunities to get that gold entry. And then there's blue. Blue entries are community picks. All right. Those are the takes that get the most engagement, the most responses, the most reactions, the most interactions from everybody that's watching. Those are rare, but they are possible. So if you want the best chance at getting multiple entries on the wheel, stay active across episodes and keep bringing football takes to the conversation, because every episode gives you another opportunity to move your position on the board, right? And that's how we do it here, baby. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, TheyKallMeBoss. This is Football is Money, and we are.
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening to Football is Money. Find every episode and more at footballismoney.com.